Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we left off right here talking about the stock market crash from 1929 leading into the Great Depression, why the stock market crash happened. We talked about the rise of totalitarian dictators. We talked about the really kind of abstract view of this roaring 20s and how there was still a lot of problems going on, and the roaring 20s were only truly meant for those of the middle class and possibly above, right? So we were getting into a lot of deeper stuff and a lot more economic, kind of heady, above the shoulders kind of stuff. But what we're getting into now is a lot more of the stuff that y'all like a lot. And it's like a human nature thing. It's like a very, very weird human nature thing to be really interested in these totalitarian dictators, specifically Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin. It's hard not to be interested. It's hard not to be interested to kind of look back at history and kind of put yourselves in the shoes of being one of the citizens of a place like Italy or Germany and being like, why? Why would you allow these things to happen? Why would everybody just let these things go down? Well, today we're going to get into that. Today we're going to answer a lot of the questions of, well, how did they do it? Why did they do it? What was their method, right? And so let's go ahead and get into it. But the biggest thing about it is a lot of historians beg the question, would these totalitarian dictators, these fascist dictators, this communist dictator, have been able to rise to power had the Great Depression not happened? Well, of course, that's an ifs and an ands question, which we don't have any kind of answer to. But we do know that the Great Depression affected the entire West, because like I said earlier in the last clip, that's a huge misconception that, oh, well, I thought that only America was affected by the Great Depression. No, not at all. The entire world was affected by the Great Depression. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that after World War I, U.S. became a major source for business loans and financial support, right? So if a stock market crash happens in the United States, the money that the United States has been loaning out this whole time now is wildly going to be recalled, and it's going to cause a massive ripple effect through the entirety of Western economics. So looking at it, the best way to look at it is this thing called the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan was enacted by Congress after World War I as a method to try and prevent the economic downfall of places like Germany, as well as the European allies of the United States. So the idea was take the Dawes Plan, give money to Germany, so they can pay back their debtors, which is France and England and the other allies, and then France and Britain can pay the money back to the U.S., so you're just sending money in a giant circle, right? You're not losing anything, it's just moving through the entire system. So this problem that it presents, though, is what happens if an economic crisis happens in the United States? Well, the money that needs to go to Germany to pay France, to pay Britain, to pay us is now going to be gone, right? So this Great Depression and the stock market crash of 1929, October 29th, 1929, is going to create a ripple effect throughout all of Western civilizations. Because when the banks went under in the United States, the money that financed these growing multinational corporations, the building of these factories and imperial colonies that financed the growth and development of some of these small self-determined nations in Eastern Europe. The banks, when they go under in the United States, the money that finances these projects goes with it, sending this huge ripple throughout the entire world economy. And so, however bad our unemployment was, the rest of the world's unemployment was just as bad. So that is going to be the main measurement. The main measurement of the Great Depression is almost always unemployment rate, okay? So by 1933, and 1933 is the year that Hitler officially comes to power, by 1933, 30% of Germany is unemployed. 30%, 33% actually, technically, was unemployed. 6 million men in Germany were unemployed. Now, notice I said the word men. We'll get to that here in a second, all right? We'll get to that here in a second, talk more about why men became the face of unemployment. And in the United States, it was as high as 25% at its peak. In the United Kingdom, it was as high as 22% at its peak. Women also were more likely to keep their jobs in the Great Depression. Wait, what? Wait, back it up, Mr. Terry. What are you talking about? What do you mean, like women were more likely to keep their jobs? Why were men losing their jobs? Women were more likely to keep their jobs during the Industrial Revolution, or not the Industrial Revolution, during the Great Depression, due to the fact that they weren't getting paid as much in the first place. So since women earned a meager salary by comparison to a man, during the Great Depression, factory owners kept women employed to keep their businesses from shutting down, whereas they fired and laid off men instead because they were more expensive to pay. So this is one of the very first times that wage inequality in the United States in some very strange way helped out women, but it's not a help at all because they're not making enough to support a family, right? So women are more likely to lose their jobs, and were more likely to keep their jobs. And this image of the masculine man, the homeowner, the breadwinner, the father, the everything, the masculinity concept of man has now been absolutely destroyed because this is going to increase this concept of fractured masculinity. So what I'm getting at is the development of these dictators, because what we're getting into now is where they came from and why people like Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, why these guys were able to rise to prominence. Why were they able to come to the top? Why were they able to convince people that they were a good thing, which we all know that they weren't. Looking back through history, we all know that they're terrible people. So how were they able to do this? And a lot of it relates back to that fractured masculinity. The fact that these dictators were going after these men who thought that they were worthless. These men during the Great Depression in Italy, Germany, particularly those two, which is going to be the two that we talk about right now, Italy and Germany. We'll talk about Stalin here in a second because he's a whole other bag of rocks. Gulag. Bag of rocks. You don't get that. Now, anyway, so the biggest thing about it is these men in Italy and Germany fought in a world war. Some of them probably lost limbs. Some of them probably lost their entire savings during the hyperinflation of the German economy following the Treaty of Versailles. They're losing their money. They're losing their jobs. They lost their limbs for a war, and now they can't provide for their families. So it's making them feel worthless. It's making them feel like they're not good enough. It's making them feel like the government and other entities went into their homes and ripped away from them this idea of being a man, which we know, today in 2020, we know that that's a fluctuating idea. You can be any man you want to be. But in the 1930s, the only concept that men had of men was providers, okay? And so these guys, like Hitler and Mussolini, are going to prey upon these men who are mad, who are angry, who have been laid off, who are upset. They're going to go after everybody. Now, it is a common misconception that totalitarian dictators preyed upon the poor and the not smart. Whoa, go on back. What are you doing now? That's not true. They had middle class support. They had support from everywhere. And they want to try and promise to restore this masculinity. I'm going to give you back the things that you lost. I'm going to give you back this sense of manhood that is now gone because we're going to do this and this and this and this. And it was very successful, creepily successful. If you ever see a politician one day doing the things that I'm about to talk to you about, it's a red flag. It's scary, right? And it's important that you're understanding these things. And because I don't really feel that, I feel the whole we study history to prevent it from occurring again, I think that's a bunch of malarkey. I think it's a bunch of just due to the fact that history is pretty cyclical. People like this are going to show up again. The better thing about it though is if you're intelligent and educated, you can sense it and then you can possibly divert it or you can expose people, right? So that's the big thing. Because you can't prevent things from happening countrywide, but you can try to be able to be preventative, right? So now some of y'all are like, oh, sweet. He's going to go over that stuff we're talking about in my timeline project, which is for the academic girls. That is due by the 14th of May, which you need to get on now. It's going to take some time. And then some of y'all are, the honors girls, are like, oh, he's going to talk about stuff that I could use in my essay that I'm building with my friends. That is due on the 14th that you need to get on top of because it's worth a quiz grade. And then the academic timeline is worth a test grade. It tells last assignment. This is the thing that could carry you forward. Do it well, all right? So now the thing about it is you think that we're about to talk about all these other events. Now, this flip applies a little bit more to the honors girls simply because it's more thematic. But my academic girls, this can help you a lot by giving you a skeleton structure of what you're working towards, right? It'll kind of give you this idea of, oh, you'll be like, oh, 1933. He said 1933 was going to be the year that Hitler finally comes to power. And so I know the Treaty of Versailles goes over here. Remember, it's going to be all mixed up all over the place. It's going to go like neutral event, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler. Like, it's going to go in a mixed up order. Remember to color code your slides, though, okay? Because it's supposed to be like a little timeline. Now, anyway, getting into it, though. Hitler and Mussolini are trying to promise to restore that masculinity, right? And now we're going to talk about what were the specific methods, the thematic methods that these men took to take over countries using a message of hate, which would never really occur now because we're all so much more educated and we all like understand a lot more concepts and things like that. But let's talk about how they do it, how they pull this off. Well, let's start with the first thing they did. The very first thing they did was they created these things known as paramilitary groups. Now, some of you are like, what the heck is a paramilitary group? A paramilitary group was this idea of hiring men in military-like roles that were not official militaries. I want you to imagine for a moment that Hitler started a police force. Before he came to power, this is after World War I, and going into the Great Depression, when men are unemployed, when men have been injured, when men don't have a job, when they're looking for something to do, he's like, oh, we're going to give you your masculinity back because I'm going to get you to be what's known as stormtroopers, okay? So these are his stormtroopers. Look at this picture right here of him being an absolute piece of crap. That's him right there with his brown shirts. These young men, look at, like, that's, like, if that's not stereotypical masculine, I don't know what is. Like, these young men all around him, his brown shirts would go into neighborhoods and hunt down communists, because they're the enemy, right? Like, and he would be restoring their masculinity of this brave, strong men trying to save Germany from the economic crisis that is happening to it and then blaming it on the communists and saying it's their fault. When it's like, actually, Hitler kind of created a lot of these problems intentionally to give these men more feelings of masculinity. These are his black shirts, also known as the SS or the Schutzstaffel. And then going further into it, though, there was also an Italian version of it. Mussolini did the same thing. These are the Italian black shirts, like in your project for the academic girls. You already saw in 1922, the black shirts march on Italy with Mussolini, and they force the government to give Mussolini power. So you're talking about, like, literally forcible uprisings of men that were, like, in these fake military groups. You could almost think about them, like I said, like vigilantes. They think they are. They think they're Batman when they're actually being the Joker. You know what I'm saying? So, like, these paramilitary groups are very important. And these groups roam the streets, intimidated politicians. And what I mean by that is, like, if you don't vote to make Hitler, like, chancellor on, like, the 33 vote, then I'm going to come back to your house and beat the ever-loving daylights out of you. Like, that's intimidation. So Hitler's going to use these people as, like, his own little personal security force. Mussolini's going to do the exact same thing. And they physically assaulted minorities, people who were Jewish, people who were of Roma ancestry, people who were immigrants, and they would make them drink like castor oil. Castor oil is this stuff that if you drink it, it gives you violent indigestion, and like it's like painful and stuff. They would force that down their throats, and they would assault them in the streets, and they would do all this other crazy stuff to restore that concept of the strong masculine man. And as of 1933, when Hitler was commanding the German government due to the Enabling Act and due to the fact that he was created as chancellor by 1933, that's a pretty quick turnover. 1929, he's just an up-and-comer. By 1933, he's in command of the government. A lot of it has to do to these paramilitary groups. So the paramilitary groups, once he becomes leader of Germany, because Mussolini had been leader of Italy since 1922, okay, like for like 10 years before Hitler ever even came to power, because it's going to take a little bit longer for Hitler, because he's limited by the Treaty of Versailles, he's limited by a lot of different stuff. So his paramilitary groups are going to become much more violent. Now, when you're in charge, how do you keep that paramilitary group thriving? What do? Create enemies, okay? So the Nazis and the Italians, Nazis, of course, being the National Socialist Party that was established by, like, the Germans in, I think, 1921, all right? So the Nazis and the Italians turned their paramilitary groups loose to violently attack communists, Jews, other minorities. Communists was a big one early on. By 1935, 2 years, from 2 years, which in the historyscape is nothing, Hitler issues the Nuremberg laws in 1935, which are laws that are going to begin to define the German Aryan race, the pure Aryan race, and begins to segregate Jews and undesirables from their society. And this is like a chart that actually is related to the Nuremberg laws that traces your ancestry back to see if you are of pure German heritage. He wants to culturally cleanse everyone because remember, he's a fascist. He's hyper-nationalist, right? He's all about Germany and the German people and all this other stuff. So in the Nuremberg laws, that's what begins the slow encroachment of the Holocaust. Now, I highly recommend you take Miss Hook's Holocaust class or Holocaust studies at some point, which I know a lot of the girls right now who have taken this class know exactly what these things are. That was the first step in creating limited environments for Jewish people. And then we're going to identify them. And then we're going to consolidate them in the ghettos. And then they're going to start, because like this is a slow process. It's not like all of a sudden he just showed up and started being like, oh, I don't like them, right? Like one day. This was a very, very slow, meticulous process, right? But the Nuremberg laws is the beginning of, someone could argue the beginning of the forced movement of the Holocaust. And then like other events like Kristallnacht are going to happen in 1938, which is the night of broken glass, right? Kristallnacht, Kristall meaning glass, Nacht meaning night. And so Kristallnacht is going to be the night of broken glass in 1938, when unfortunately the son of a Jewish business owner, who's a young Jewish man himself, after being intimidated by these paramilitary groups for so long, he shot and killed one of them. And so the entire German Schlutzstaffel and the brown shirts, the SS and the SA, they just run loose and they start destroying Jewish businesses, burning homes, looting like Jewish homes, like doing all this. This right here is the aftermath of the Kristallnacht. This is the inside of a Jewish synagogue that has been gutted, ripped, burned, and like actually completely destroyed, and all the glass has been shattered, right? So like this is how Hitler managed to keep restoring this masculinity. Oh, I have these paramilitary groups now? Let's give them some enemies, right? Like let's give them some people to hate. And so Hitler's goal in this entire thing was to start creating this thing known as a Volksgemeinschaft, all right? Volksgemeinschaft meaning the people's community, but just for German people. A pure German race. And so he's going to start cleansing them out. And then by 1938, like he starts cleansing out people of Roma ancestry. Like if you weren't considered German enough, if you were of Roma ancestry, Jewish, different sexual orientation, mentally handicapped, he literally had mobile trucks with the exhaust pumping into the back that would pick up people with mental disabilities and kill them by the time they got to the woods to bury them. So like it wasn't just one group of people. He's restoring this masculinity concept by giving his paramilitary people to hate. And this wasn't just in Germany. In 1938, the Italian racial laws came out, which did the same thing that the Nuremberg laws did, revoking citizenship for Jewish Italians, revoking certain jobs for Jewish Italians. So Mussolini did it too. He took a lot of like cues from Hitler as he was like growing as well. So also, then what do you do? Then what else do you do, okay? So now you have got these paramilitary groups. Now you've got the enemies for them to hunt down. Well, what about, like I said earlier, women were more likely to keep their jobs in the Great Depression because they didn't get paid as much. So what do you do about them? How do you make a man feel more like a man when you're like trying to rise to power so you can have unattainable loyalty from these men? Reduce the rights of women. They created only servile positions for women. They told women that your place is only in the home. You are there to make children. Germans during the Great Depression, if they had a wife and a father, or sorry, not a wife and a father, a mother and a father, of German heritage that were German race, they got loans to keep having these pure German children, and women were told they had to stay home. Jobs were stripped away from women and given to men instead. This made them depend on a men's wages, so that creates a dependency of women upon men. Yet again, restoring that feeling of fractured masculinity that World War I and the Great Depression have ripped away. Like this right here, this says protect, or women wait. Like that right there, Frauenwarte, like that means women wait. So it's saying the women wait here at home while the men go off and fight and work. Like look at it. Like that literally is propaganda all about the Nazis trying to say, oh, women, you belong in the house and that is the only place and you are here to make what? Babies. Look at the Italian propaganda right here. Oh, hey, women, you're here to make little baby Mussolinis and then other little babies as well, right? So like you reduce the rights of women. And so then what else are you going to do? Well, now you've got paramilitary groups, right? So you got them hunting down people in the streets. You created their enemies. You reduce the rights of their women. That's making them feel a lot more like men. Well, some of them still don't have work. What do you do then? You promise them work. You make work for them. You employ men in your paramilitary groups, which they're going to start paying these men in the paramilitary groups. But then also, every man can't work in a paramilitary group. You got to have some other options for them. So they start creating labor services. One of the biggest ones in Italy, this is fascist architecture in Italy. Mussolini created construction labor forces that would build all these old fascist architecture buildings. Not like old fascist architecture, if you understand what I'm saying. Fascism, remember, is ultranationalism, extremely right-wing obedience to the state. All of his stuff was like the old Rome coming back. Arches, and this is supposed to be an Olympic theater in Italy built by unemployed men. So like that was a big thing. Employ them, force them to be employed, or don't force them to be employed, but figure out a way to create jobs for them. Now, Hitler did a little bit more of a different way. He created an actual Nazi labor service, right? So this right here is the flag of the Nazi labor service. Take their gun, give them a shovel, all right? So this right here is a group of young men that are actually in this labor service, and that right there is actually Hitler doing the first scoop of building a large highway. So like that right is a very big thing. Make them jobs. Now some of you are immediately saying like, well, wait a minute. Make forced jobs, like open jobs. But hold on. Somebody has to pay for all that work. Somebody's got to pay for it. Like, and if it's the Great Depression, who's paying for these things? That's the thing. This caused massive debt, all right? So Hitler put Germany into further debt to create his labor service, to create this thing that just gave men jobs, right? Yes, it caused a lot of debt. Yes, it caused a lot of debt for the Italians to build this fascist architecture, but Hitler promised to make the money later in future conquests. Like, so that's kind of seeing through the vein of later. Now, also, what else can you do to keep giving the masculine men their thing? Oh, wait, we've taken care of the men, right? We gave them violence, right, with the paramilitary group, check. We created enemies for them, check. We reduced the rights of women, check. We gave them a job, check. These men will be so devoted to Hitler and Mussolini now because of those things. There's no question. No question. They'll do whatever they tell them to. Then how do you get the kids? You indoctrinate the youth, right? Create youth organizations to teach your hateful ideology at a young age. These are the two most prominent ones. That is the Hitler Youth right there, an organization made for young men from the ages of 8 to 18. This is the Italian Youth, which is like, they're so adorable. But literally, it was a group created to give them little paramilitary uniforms and to make it seem like they were in those groups that their fathers were using violence to go and assault people with. So it's a very scary thing. It's a very, very scary thing. And then what other methods are there? You got other huge methods that are going to be employed by these people as well. Propaganda, that right here. This right here is the triumph of the will. This is an actual video of one of Hitler's most popular, propaganda films. Okay, Triumph of the Will. And it shows him literally in a plane descending out of the heavens as if he was like God himself. And then when he arrives at an airfield, he is like flying over the top of Berlin, and there's a giant parade waiting for them. And this was made by Leni Riefenstahl and like one of his big propaganda filmmakers. And this was shown in movie theaters. all over Germany. Remember we talked about in the 1920s, the rise of that consumer economy, right? The rise of the cinema. Hitler uses it to his advantage. He creates propaganda films. He is going to show people that, look at all these people in Berlin, in our capital. They love me. Look at all of them saluting him and ready for him to come out. And then there he is, and he, like, I hate the way he waves. And, like, that is, look at the smiling faces of these women. Follow Hitler. He's the guy, right? Like, so, like, that is absolutely ridiculous. So propaganda. Also, wait a minute, though. Let's say you got somebody out in the country, out in the bunkins, that doesn't have a theater nearby. What do you do to them? You give them a radio, the People's Radio. So the People's Radio was a radio that was made super cheap and affordable by his propaganda leader, Hermann Goebbels. All right, so Goebbels actually made this thing called the People's Radio that was super affordable for anybody to like actually afford. And then on the radio stations, they had Hitler ads pumped through it like all the time. Other methods, you're going to have negative propaganda. Well, look at our positive propaganda for them, positive integration. We're going to make Hitler look awesome. We're going to do all these things. Negative propaganda, how do you keep making them think that these other people are terrible? Whole book burnings. Negative propaganda was a big thing in the Nazi regime. Burn the books of Jewish authors, burn the books of suspected communist authors, burn the books of all these things, and literally try to snuff out their information and make a big deal of it, make it a big event, make it a whole thing. Holidays and vacations. This is one of the creepiest ones to me. Hitler had a program called his Strength Through Joy campaign, where he created holidays and vacations for Nazi people to feel like, oh, the only reason that I can afford to have happy times and leisure time with my family is because of Adolf, right? Like he had community exercise classes organized where people could go and like actually have like a YMCA for Nazis, all right? So there were pins given out at massive events so you could collect all of them. Like, oh, look, I went to this event. I went to this thing, like, right? And then he even had a car built for his people as well called the Volkswagen, the people's car, right? And so, like, very, very affordable car for people. So this is a scary thing. It's super creepy, right? Now, what are our other approaches? What are our other major approaches? Well, Stalin's a little bit different. I know that was a little weird cut, and I dropped down here real fast, but you know what? I had to double check on the time to make sure I wasn't taking too long. But Stalin, anyway, getting back to him, we're going to kind of pick up speed a little bit here. So if you need to pause, just so you can kind of jot some things down, but make sure you listen to this, right? It's very, very important, or else you won't understand what's going on. Now, Stalin is not the same as your Hitler or your Mussolini. They're not going to be using paramilitary groups. They're not going to be using, youth indoctrination as much. They're not going to be using and he actually definitely didn't reduce the rights of women. Actually, Stalin increased the rights of women in Russia, but they're also communists, so what rights does anybody really have? But anyway, getting into it though, you have to understand that the man of steel himself, Stalin, didn't you have to do all that stuff? There isn't that much modernization in Russia. So when you're talking about trying to do all the things that Germany did, Russia's so big you don't really have a point in doing it. You've got two main problems that we'll get to here in a second that Stalin had to deal with. But just so you know, Stalin is going to start out as a young revolutionary. He's from Georgia. His real name isn't even Joseph Stalin, because Stalin means the man of steel. His real name is Losif Dezhgashvili, all right? So being from Georgia and whatnot. Not Georgia as in Atlanta. Georgia as in the country in Eastern Europe. Get out of here. Now, also, as he rose to prominence, he actually became very close with Vladimir Lenin. Yes, he was a part of Vladimir Lenin's inner circle, along with Trotsky. So Vladimir Lenin, of course, we talked about him, the guy that led the October Revolution in Russia, who started the Bolshevik group, who started the Russian Social Democratic Party. That guy that becomes the first leader of the USSR, who enacts his new economic plan, who does all these other things. What you got to understand, though, is Lenin is not going to live forever. And Lenin actually really struggles in his later years. He has a series of seizures that leads to his death in 1924. Now, immediately, some of you are saying, well, we haven't even heard of Stalin this entire time. So where did he come from? Stalin moved up the ranks significantly after the Soviet Union was officially established. From the years of 1922 to 24, he becomes a confidant of Vladimir Lenin. And also during the revolution itself, he fought within the Red Army as a physical revolutionary. Now, when Lenin dies in 1924, a lot of y'all immediately are like, well, wouldn't Trotsky take over? He was there the entire time. Well, Trotsky would have taken over had Stalin not betrayed him. So Stalin actually made enemies of his own party leaders. There was a group of inner circle members that were with Vladimir Lenin that were very close with him, but he starts turning on them and he starts ousting them out of Russia, accusing them of conspiracy against Lenin, accusing them of being anti-communist, accusing them of actually going against their new country. And so he slowly deintegrates them out of the Russian, the Russian government, and he kind of, in a weird way, just makes himself the last standing, most powerful man in Russia, making him like the de facto dictator. Now, he tries to attack two massive problems that are present in Russia. From 1928 to 1939, he's got two huge issues. He's got high unemployment, and he's got famine, all right? Now, the unemployment comes from the fact that they don't have a lot of factories in Russia, and they don't have a lot of places for people to work. The famine comes from the fact that they don't have a lot of very good agricultural production because it's not modernized. So, and I could talk all day long about Stalin's rise to power and stuff like that, but he creeps me out, so I don't want to spend too much time on him. Also, you just need to understand that he's a communist dictator, so he's just trying to provide for the state, right? He needs to figure out a way to make sure the farmers and the workers are kept happy, and then everybody will be able to move forward. Now, so the first thing he wants to do about the famine is he wants to collectivize agriculture. Now, collectivizing agriculture is the idea of this, it's the communist idea of collectivizing the means of production. Don't make it so a farm is owned by one family and they make money off what they grow. No, you make it so the state owns these massive farms that produce enough food for the entire populace. So, problem is, who are those well-to-do farmers that own small farms and actually are known as these demons, according to Lenin and Stalin? The kulaks, all right? We talked about them in the Russian Revolution, the demonization of the kulaks, the mass execution of the kulaks. Apparently, at one point, Vladimir Lenin was quoted as saying, hang no less than 100 kulaks for the public to see. Like, they called them swine and disgusting. What kulak means in Russian is fist. And, like, what they're referring to with kulaks is, like, they're hiding extra food inside their in-clutched fist because they're like a middle-class farmer. So part one of his thing known as his Great Purge, underline Great Purge, star Great Purge, circle it like 1,800 times. Stalin is literally trying to purge out traits that he doesn't like of people. So what you have to understand is you purge when you throw up. You're getting rid of something, okay? Stalin wants to get rid of the kulaks, these middle-class farmers, because he believes that they're holding on to good farmland and all these other things. And so he goes and he has his Red Army execute livestock, execute kulaks and their families, strip them of their land. But the big problem was it was a massive backfire because, like, famine actually got worse. When he collectivized agriculture, 10 million people died from starvation. So when his original plan for his Great Purge didn't work, let's just blame the kulaks and let's just go take all their land. Part two of the Great Purge was to prevent the Bolsheviks from blaming him. He then blamed them instead. Just like when he got rid of Trotsky, just right when he got rid of Lenin's inner circle, he decides to start blaming the Bolsheviks, and that's the second part of his Great Purge, where he blamed his own party and the members near him, being like, "Oh no, all this is their fault. Let's put them on trial, and they'll confess for their crimes after being tortured for days." And so he has them sent to these places where they will work for free, called the gulags. Now, the gulags are forced labor camps, okay? Forced labor camps, like concentration camps before Hitler even got the plan to actually start one. Stalin already had the gulags. And like I said, this is not an image from a concentration camp. That is a gulag. It is a work camp from Russia. Now, this right here is a great image of Stalin's Great Purge, of his second phase of his purge, where he blamed his own party. Notice that in the top picture, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 men. And then in this one, there's only 1, 2, 3. And then in this one, there's only 1, 2. And then there's just him. It's because as the years went on, he kept blaming these party members, and they were stricken from records. He would have them executed or sent to the gulags, and they would be doctored images released, where they were no longer in them, as if they never existed. Now, that's creepy. Stalin's freaky. And the Americans like to call him Old Uncle Joe. All right, so now, also, how do you attack unemployment? Well, just so you know, he has a plan for that. Just like every communist leader has a plan. You hyper-industrialize, and you give your plan a fancy name. And so he calls his plan the 5-year plan. He proclaimed this 5-year plan starting in 1928, but not really getting off the ground until 1932, that in his 5-year plan, he would create a system, 2 + 2 = 5. All right, so the idea that he would create a system where he would build up factories, forcefully build up factories, to create a Russia that would make more goods and make more goods faster, okay? So he starts building up these factories. And the big ones, some of the biggest ones happen to be like Stalingrad, which is going to come into major play later. Underline Stalingrad. It's very important. But they have a massive tractor plant built in Stalingrad. And then they have another place called Magnitogorsk, which happens to be becomes the center of Soviet steel production. And then they have the coal mines in Ural. Now, the crazy thing about it is it creates these industrial centers. Now, these are just a couple of examples. There's many, 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 many more. So with these guys, though, he creates these industrial centers. And then he builds cities around these factories. Who's going to live in the cities? The people that work in the factories. So he actually creates a situation for people to have a job, have somewhere to live, and have a life that they can lead. So production is actually going to increase over 150% of what it was before his 5-year plan. Now, did he kill millions of people? Yes, there are some studies that claim that Stalin actually had more people, is responsible for more death than Hitler is actually responsible for, due to the fact that his great purges actually saw the execution of massive numbers of people. Now, production, yeah, it's going to increase, but he's going to have massive downfalls of his 5-year plan because, as we know, collectivized agriculture did not work and starved out a lot of people. And this free labor you were getting was because you had people in prison camps starving to death and literally working themselves to death. And the gulags were all out in Siberia. There's actually a phenomenal book about the gulags that I'm actually going to be reading this summer by an author known, I think it's Appleton is her last name, and it's apparently supposed to be phenomenal, so I'm super excited about it. Now, anyway, going further, though, that's Stalin's rise to power. Now, he doesn't have as much of an intricate rise to power with propaganda and all this other stuff, reducing the rights of women, paramilitary groups, because he's not a democratic nation. He's a communist nation. He doesn't have to do that much. He just has to come to power, and then he's in charge, right? So now it's a little bit different, though, because then some of you are like, oh, well, now we're going to talk more about the other guys, like in Germany and Italy? Nope, we gotta take a second, all right? Because meanwhile, in the East, Japan, what the heck are you doing? You have to understand, this adds the element to World War II that contributes to the Western civilization story. Yes, we're taking a Europe-focused lens all the time, but Japan is heavily involved in this. So Japan causes a massive ripple effect in the Eastern Hemisphere. So meanwhile, over in the East, Japan decides to start invading China, particularly an area known as Manchuria. Now, Manchuria is in northern China, near Korea. They decide to invade in 1931 because they are after one thing, their natural resources. So think about it this way. Japan has become has also become industrialized. So by the 1880s, they began to build factories and run telephone wires and have electricity, and they kind of got on par with this whole industrialization process. And it was aided by the Americans and the English and the Germans and like all these other people in the late 1800s. And so the Japanese, that's why they were able to beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. It's because they were actually much more modern than people realized. But the problem is, Japan's a series of small islands. They don't have that many resources to mine or to use, so they decide to invade China to get some of theirs. So when they invaded northern China in 1931 for the natural resources, they never issued a declaration of war. They never did any of the proper steps, and this violated League of Nations rules. So Japan said, oh, I broke rules for the League of Nations, but I'm still going to want those natural resources. So they just refused to leave China, and instead they just leave the League of Nations. And that started the Second Sino-Japanese War. Notice I say second, because Japan and China have had a war with each other before. Now, this was going to last from 1937 to 1945. So with this whole thing, though, who were their leaders? Oh, well, there's two of them that you need to know about. You have one that was called the God Emperor, known as Emperor Hirohito, and then he was a very young man, only in his 30s, but in Japanese culture, they revered their leader as like a godlike figure. And then you have your war minister, Hideki Tojo, all right? So Hideki Tojo is going to be another massive player who becomes the leader of their government during World War II, okay? He becomes like their prime minister and their direct de facto leader, okay? So this is going to lead to a lot of terrible atrocities. The Japanese Nanjing Massacre is probably the worst one, or Nanking is also what it's referred to as. In 1937, in the process of invading China, they were after one particular city, the city of Nanjing, which at the time was the capital of the Republic of China. In 1937, they decided to start moving their way towards that capital, and on the way, there is no clue of knowing, but it is estimated that they executed or killed or defiled or assaulted or physically maimed anywhere from 40,000 to 300,000 innocent civilians. I'm talking about men, women, and children here, right? Like women and children, older people, as they tried to invade the city of Nanjing. It's considered to this day to be a very big war crime, but there's a huge debate between Japan and China over the accuracy of the numbers and stuff like that. But as you can tell, Japan is going to cause a massive ripple as well. And all of the red in here, not the red stripes, those are communist outposts for China. All the red right here, that is going to be claimed territory by Japan. So as you can tell, Japan took over a massive swath of land because they're after more goods and they were starting to get extremely greedy. Now, we got to keep moving though, okay? So now they have their support. So Tojo, Hirohito, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, they all have support now, right? Support of their countries, support of their economies, support of their military, support of their everything. So when does World War II really get started off then? Then why does it happen? Mainly due to the fact that Germany and Italy kind of start making waves against the Treaty of Versailles. So remember, the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I in 1918, and it was very mean to Germany. The war guilt clause made them pay back massive reparations. The only thing from the 14 points that it used was, of course, the League of Nations. Well, Italy and Germany are going to start really pushing against that document and violating a lot of its rules. One thing that if Italy does that doesn't technically violate the Treaty of Versailles, they invade Ethiopia, which at the time was known as, which at the time was known as Abyssinia, okay? So they invaded Ethiopia in like I can't remember what year, but this is going to cause massive nervousness throughout all of Europe, okay? So with that, go away. With that, it's going to cause a massive amount of nervousness. Now, by 1935, the Treaty of Versailles says that Germany can have an army of no more than 100,000, that the draft is banned, that they are not allowed to have an air force, that they can't have submarines, and that they have to have an insanely small navy of only 12 battleships. Well, Hitler brings back the draft and makes 500,000 men strong. 13 million total would actually serve in World War II. Hitler also then created the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Luftwaffe, very important. Underline them, star them, circle them, okay? Hitler then also built up his navy. Whoa, wait a minute. He just violated a lot of Treaty of Versailles rules. Why aren't the Allies getting involved? They're just sitting on their hands like, oh, it's not happening, it's going to be fine, because they're so afraid of war. By 1936, the Treaty of Versailles says also that Hitler is not allowed to occupy this thing known as the Rhineland. This is the Rhineland. It's the area of Western Germany between Germany and France. Because remember, in World War I, Germany directly invaded France through Belgium. So they're not allowed to have a military in that area. Hitler puts a military in there. Doesn't care. He remilitarizes the Rhineland. Okay? So then in 1938, the Treaty of Versailles also says that Germany must respect Austria's claim as a nation. And they are not to be a part of Germany as a whole country. Germany or Hitler says, "Oh no, I'm just gonna annex them," and then they do that. They literally gobble up Austria and suck them into the new German territory and created basically a larger German country. And it's called Anschluss. And he's after their gold reserves because Austria has a ton of like actual physical gold, and then also he's after just like any means he can get. And then the Austrians are cheering him in the streets. They're like, "Oh yay, Hitler is here, and he's gonna make us a big giant Germany." So he takes over Austria. Why? Why are the Allies allowing this? Why are they letting him break these treaties without being checked? It's because they're trying to practice this diplomatic thing called appeasement, which is the policy of conceding things, hoping that something won't happen or a war won't break out, okay? And this is a political cartoon, of course, about appeasement. You've got Hitler right here making like a nana-nana-like face and walking all over the backs of the spineless leaders of democracy, right? So this appeasement is going to keep getting worse, though, because then Hitler annexes this place called the Sudetenland in 1938, after Austria, all right? The Sudetenland is this little area of Czechoslovakia right there. Why does he want the Sudetenland, that little pink right there? Oh, because some German-speaking people live there, and they're Germans, so they should be in Germany. And so you would think, like, oh, okay, the Allies are now, this is too much, right? The Allies are now going to put their foot down. They're going to tell Hitler he's got to chill out, right? Right, Mr. Terry? Right? No, they did nothing again. They gave in again, and at the Peace of Munich, or at the Treaty of Munich, they agreed to allow Germany to annex the Sudetenland. And then in 1939 is the craziest year leading up. Hitler annexes the rest of Czechoslovakia, so he now controls this whole entire thing. They're now the biggest continental territory in Europe other than Russia. The Allies did nothing again. But then in September of 1939, September 1st, Germany bombs Poland and uses the blitzkrieg and actually just goes full tilt into European war. And due to this fact, since Poland and Germany had a treaty that said they weren't allowed to be invaded by one another because Poland's a new country, they're just a baby little new guy that was made out of the leftovers of Russia and Germany after World War I. He invades Poland using the blitzkrieg. Underline blitzkrieg, it's very important. And France and the United Kingdom are going to finally declare war on Germany September 1st, 1939, and World War II starts, okay? So we will talk about this stuff a little bit more on the next couple flips. I know this is a long one, but it's a lot of good stuff. So I'll talk to y'all later. Y'all have a good one.